right, well, maybe we get started. How does that sound?
Yeah, and I think we have a couple of people here who are not TAC members, but it's mostly TAC members as we're getting started. I still think it's useful to do a just a quick good morning and one sentence. Maybe although it seems inauthentic to call on people and then have them repeat their names. Um, but I'll do that and just see if there's anything you want to share as we get started for 15 seconds or less. So Alex, I'm going to take people on my screen as they go. But Alex, you got to unmute, pal. Sorry.
Never less traveled. Um, Alex Smith, I'm with Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. Kind of blown away by the fact that almost a year of this process has whizzed by all of a sudden. Yeah, feeling been a pleasure to get to work with all you folks.
Greg,
Hey, good morning. Greg Gustina, Green Mountain and Finger Lakes National Forests. And I missed a number of meetings early part of the year, so got to catch back up a little bit today. But good to see everyone.
nice to see you too. Hey, Gunnar, go ahead.
Hey everyone, Gunnar Nurmi with FPR. Yeah, excited to be getting near the finish line. This has flown by. Excited to hear the birds singing outside.
It sure is. Chris Campany,
Hey, good morning, everybody. Chris Campany, Wyndham Regional Commission. Greetings from Brattleboro.
Emily,
Good morning, everyone. Emily Alger with the Center for Whole Communities. I'm really excited that the peepers are back and also really looking forward to some sunshine to do some bike riding with my kids.
amazing, right? Ari,
Hey everyone, Ari Rockland-Miller with the Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets. Great to be here.
thank you. Hey, Becca.
Good morning. I echo Emily's joy for spring. I work for Forest Parks and Recreation and saw my first two red Fs last night while salamander hunting with my son.
Nice.
So excited.
Krista,
Hi, everybody. I'm Krista from the Thetford Conservation Commission, and I will echo that the amphibians are out. They're very geographically, what's the word, particular. Like we have some vernal pools that are very much awake and some that are still like frozen. So it's fun to watch them all start to come to life.
Gus,
Good morning, Gus Seelig, Executive Director at VHCB, and like everyone, glad spring is here and that we're getting some rain too.
Nick,
Nick Bannon, Executive Director at the Vermont Mountain Bike Association. I also chair the Vermont Trails and Greenways Council. I think I'm both echoing some of the sentiments, extremely excited to get back in the woods on my mountain bike here in the next couple of weeks as trails start to open, and also definitely reflecting a lot lately on all the fur over Act 181 and 325 and kind of how the implications that has for the process, particularly around the communication side of things. So I think there's still reflecting, don't have a perspective, but I think it gives us could help inform our work over the next couple months.
there's a lot going on. Gannon,
Morning, everybody. Gannon Osborne with the Nature Conservancy of Vermont. There's still snow out there, people. It's spring skiing in places. I'm not pulling out the mountain bike yet, Nick. Sorry. And also reflecting on Alex's. It's been a year since we've all been together, which has flown by, but it's also been like 3 or 4 years for some folks in this process, which feels like a very long time and coming to this point. So glad we're here.
Chris Castano,
Good morning, everyone. Maine Woods Company, but I live here in Vermont, and I just want to warn you that I took my snow tires off yesterday, so that guarantees one more significant snowfall sometime soon. Just
we'll
warning
take
you.
it. At least Gannon and I will. Jean,
Good morning, everyone. This is Jean. I use she, her pronouns, co-director with the Land Access and Opportunity Board. And Yes, I am getting my snow tires off right now. So sorry, everyone. And yeah, just really, it's an exciting moment with the land waking up and also the people waking up on the land and really getting hungry and riled up to talk about what it is everyone wants with the land. So yeah, we've been participating a lot in the 181 conversations and of course participating and cheering on the 59 Act 59 community led listening sessions and yeah, just really excited to see so many more people like really getting engaged in arguably our most important shared thing, our land. So thanks.
Cheers for that. Thank you, Jean. Any other TAC members who didn't get to say hi? I'll just let Helen, then Zach, then Tara say hi real quick since we're a small group today.
Good morning. So echoing all of the emerging spring sentiments, I'm Helen Wagenborg, a consultant to VHCB, helping with the Act 59 process.
Thanks, Helen. Zach or Tara, do you want to say hi?
Good morning, everybody. Zach Porter with Standing Trees. Good to see you.
Hi, folks. Tara Biller, they, them pronouns with Vermont Natural Resources Council, and really excited about the spring ephemerals.
Oh, so many great spring things, and I'll hand it back to you, Annie. But just say we've been watching a northern flicker in the trees by the driveway the last few mornings, and really enjoying that. Even though I agree with Gannon that there's plenty more skiing left. Anyway, back to you, Annie. No, I guess back to me to kind of step forward. Let's see. Let's take a quick look at this agenda. Normally Andy is emceeing things, but today I'm going to walk us through the first part of the agenda, and then Annie's going to lead the hot topics discussion that you can see there at 9:50 to 10:45. We've got a couple questions for you, but we also have a sort of a catch-all because there are things coming up for people, and a couple people have mentioned stuff going on in the State House, which we can spend a little time on too, as you all direct us. But let's see. I'm gonna start by just giving a couple of quick updates and observations, and then a very high-level share out of some of the feedback we're starting to synthesize with the caveat, and I'll say this again as I do it, that this is just an initial, very high-level synthesis rather than a really deep dive. So, but just wanted to put some themes out there that we're observing. And then again, we have some guiding questions to talk about before we take public comments. So this is an hour and a half today. If you need to step away, for any reason, please go ahead and do so. But we won't have a break in here. So let's go to the next slide. There are just a few things that I wanted to point out in terms of where we are and what's next. First of all, echoing the comments from people about having worked together in this group for a year and over 3 years, I think just start by saying thank you to the TAC members who are here today and to TAC members who couldn't be here today, because you have been at this a long time, and we've got 75 days left until, more or less, until the deadline for submitting the recommendations to the General Assembly, which made Becca Washburn do finishing the the Tour de France kind of like gesture. So we are finishing a long tour here, and it's been increasingly positive and wonderful to work with this group. Every meeting, I feel like we get closer and closer to having really straight, honest dialogue that makes us all better. Our diversity makes us stronger, and I really do appreciate that. Other things in here, I know you've probably been reading along as we go, but really big thank you and shout out to Center for Whole Communities. Emily and her colleague Ginny have been working with us along with Future IQ to help us to think about not just what are people saying in this feedback, but what can we learn from it, and how do we carry that forward into our work as we emerge from the planning process into implementation. We are working with A&R in the consultation role, so that's another thing just to be aware of, is that we are aiming for a May re-release of the framework and the plan with the full table of contents. so that people can see that all put together, and there'll be an opportunity for public comments. We'll do several. I think we are looking at 3 virtual public meetings. It'll be the same meeting format across 3 meetings, but we'll scatter it different days of the week, different times of the day to make sure people have a time that works for them. And then, of course, thematically connecting back to one of the things that is important about the feedback is how do we plan for and step right into ongoing collaboration and outreach and action. Because the plan's not the point. The plan is just the guide. So anyways, let's keep going on to the next slide where I can um, just point out we have 2 more TAC meetings scheduled. So we have an in-person meeting scheduled on May 21, 9:30 to 1 back in the Unitarian Church. That's our last formal time that's scheduled to be together, but we'll probably want to do something in July to celebrate in person, because we have the actual final scheduled meeting is another remote meeting like this on June 11th. That's when we'll be kind of collecting and seeing the final comments that people do on the full plan. So fun to get back together with you all at that point. Let's keep going. And I'm actually gonna let me just point out kind of where we are now. So we have finished, obviously, last summer, the 5 regional listening sessions, 6 more in February and March, and then 30 stakeholder-led listening sessions, or 30 plus stakeholder listening sessions. There were 28 grantees, but several did more than one meeting. So hundreds of people came to those meetings and provided input that is either synthesized and produced to VHCB and ANR and Future IQ and CWC. That's the different people who are helping us to crunch it. And it's kind of been an amazing outpouring. So before we look at we did a little bit of a summary of 6 themes, but just wanted to point out again that this is, we really, as we were starting into the regional listening session process, and we were having good meetings, but they were small meetings. In our collaboration and a lot of wonderful behind the scenes work with Jean and Ornella, to think about how to draw on their expertise and their planning work in the past to think about how we could get more community members involved. And so I just gonna say it again, is that huge shout out and thanks for that collaboration and that insight and the ability to work with VHCB and produce something that was, I think, really one of the highlights of this whole 3-year period for me, is seeing so many people come out. And even though we disagree sometimes about the details, generally and almost 100% people come out because they care about land stewardship and land protection. So whether the means may be in question, but the end goal just really united a lot of people to come together. So anyways, let's look at these themes here for a second, and then I will actually in about 10 minutes hand it over to Annie, so that we can talk to and hear from you all. But here's some things, and again, I'll let you read through this yourselves, but just point out that with these themes, scope and framing, the perception of abstraction and breadth, too much abstraction and breadth, not enough emphasis on reserves and old forests, the feeling of overburdenedness and private, among private landowners and community groups, this durable versus permanent debate, which is going on in and out of the Act 59 world, and then how to emphasize and make all the benefits of public lands available to the different people who access them. So those are the 6 key themes. I want to pause here before I turn it back over to Annie and just see if anybody has any observations or questions about this. We didn't want to dive in too deeply today on this, but if there's anything people want to add, or if anything you want to.
I have one question, Trey, that jumps out. Scope and framing did not support narrowing to biodiversity alone. What what VHCB presented did not narrow this to biodiversity alone, and has been very open and clear about that all along. So I'm just curious where that feedback was coming from, because that was, or how that feedback was presented, because that was not what was offered forward.
Yeah. Well, there's the on breadth and scope. There are a lot of different comments, and it wasn't like there was like just two camps, like it was partisan or something, but there were generally a set of comments that seemed to want to focus more on biodiversity and comments that wanted to focus more on uplifting working lands enterprise and conservation for working lands. Um, but this was saying that there generally weren't suggestions that were like, you need to narrow this plan much further. And you know what I mean, Gannon? So it wasn't,
So that
we
your
weren't
comment
hearing
here,
that the breadth was problematic, but where should the emphasis be between those two sort of the somewhat binary that as people were perceiving it.
so the like comment here is more a reflection of you expected to hear or anticipated or have heard the a desire to narrow this to a more of a focus on biodiversity, and that was not what you heard.
Yeah, that's a good articulation.
Okay, thank you.
Gene asked in the chat how the comments received here compare to past rounds. I'm not sure that I have all the numbers at my fingertip, Gene, but the participation and productivity of these meetings was certainly on the same scale as the sort of the set of surveys and focus groups that we did through the full um, phase one process. I see a comment in there from Zach from Standing Trees about not being binary in Act 59, and we agree. We are not trying to produce something that's binary. But when we disaggregate the data and we present it back, I think that we will see that in some cases there are on some of the themes and questions that have come up, that there are decidedly two positions or two perspectives that aren't necessarily reconcilable without more work. Or there's some opposition in some of the comments on some of the themes. And that's okay. That's not something that we didn't expect, and it's not something that we want to try and control for, because again, the various perspectives we bring are a reflection of the strength of our work together.
This Trey, this may sort of be what Gene was driving at, but I'm wondering if you've seen an evolution in the feedback since the sort of uproar around Act 181 has come into play.
I don't know. I mean, I think we were hearing in the regional meetings. I don't know that we would have predicted exactly how this played out this spring, but in January, February, and March, as we were talking to people in the regional listening sessions, and then some of the stakeholder sessions that VHCB folks or that I attended, these things were coming up, and again, I don't know that we would have foreseen exactly where it was headed, but people have been asking about permanent and non-permanent, and people have been asking questions about what the road rule means in Tier 3 and how that relates all along. And we've tried to help explain the differences in the programming, tried to think about how conservation is inclusive of all kinds of different actions, including permanent and non-permanent stewardship-based, programs, as well as regulatory programs, that they're all aiming sort of at the same thing. So it's come up, and we've tried to address it. I think a lot of I don't know whether there's as things unfold in the State House, whether there will be more public discussion in that forum of the relationship between Act 181 and Act 59. But we've certainly heard from a lot of people who feel like, in some ways, that the way that rural landowners have been included or not included has been harmful in both processes, or that the gist of these are both sort of, on one hand, using regulations because you don't trust landowners to make good decisions, and in the other case, buying up lands and separating people from the ability to manage them. And that's what people are articulating. That's certainly not how we articulate the value of conservation or what we think we're aiming at. It's putting people together with the land and supporting people being on protected land. But those very strong feelings are out there.
It feels like there's been a bit of a concerted effort in some camps to link the two, to the detriment of both missions, which is, I think, it's troubling.
I agree. I mean, again, there are obvious similarities, and there are ways that we were already observing, and we're going to double down and reporting back to the legislature and saying like how you include people, how you value them, how you do these big, policy-based initiatives like this matters. And in this case, a lot's come back to roost from people who didn't feel like they were engaged in the way that they should have been. And that's that needs to be addressed going forward. Yes, Ari is asking about food security, regional food system resilience. That, again, depending on what people are coming to, the perspective or the part of the spectrum of conservation groups and organizations, that's really important to a lot of people. And it's certainly we continue to hear support, as I said, very strong support for working lands and working lands enterprise and the parts of our plan that address that, and a desire to really focus on biodiversity and biodiversity outcomes, connectivity, the different aspects of the ANR report implementing Vermont conservation design that show up as objective one. That I think is the strength. And if we don't focus on this as a negative, we're seeing support for all the aspects of the plan from the constituencies, as well as really good comments on how to sharpen it. So been very helpful.
Appreciate that.
Anyways, meant this to be a kind of a quick kind of wet your whistle of things that are coming. Of course, we have hundreds and hundreds of pages of stuff to kind of synthesize and to think about, and we're doing that both like by hand, human-led review, as well as using AI tools to using different prompts and questions to sort things. So we're trying to bring different and having different perspectives, as well, as we go through it. So doing our best to think about both. What does it tell us now? What does it tell us that we want to make sure we report back and uplift to the legislature? And then what does it tell us about how we do business, from July 1st going forward?
Trey, we have a few hands raised.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Should we take down the slide for a second and then
Sure.
do that? And then Annie, as we emerge from this, there's sort of 3 hot topic discussion questions, which I think you guys are already starting to get into, that we can sort of we'll just try to segue as smoothly as possible. But it looks like I don't know how to order these, but Emily and then Chris, does that make sense?
And there were
Chris has been waiting longer.
Thank you, Emily. Go ahead, sir.
Hey, I was wondering if like the realities of funding also would be like maybe a number 7 on topics that came up, because to me that also relates to the I forget which number it was, but it basically like the confusion over current use, and then I would also say like in working lands, conservation reserve, wildlife habitat improvement program, other voluntary but non-permanent protections, because I've had some legislators reach out to me like, how do we get out of this morass? And my suggestion is, would you please let this plan play out and have this plan inform what you want to do to achieve your conservation goals? And by the way, the funding dynamic, I don't know what's going to happen in 26, the elections in 28, but it's going to take a long time to recover. And so if we're talking about conservation, I think like really elevating private landowner stewardship, outreach, and education. I'm thinking back to, I don't know that we have this in Vermont, maybe I've just missed it, but like other states I've lived in, like there are these, you see the plaques on the farm mailboxes, like conservation farm or conservation forest, other kinds of programs like that. So I'm not trying to get too deep into it, but I was just curious if the like the funding realities relative to what the legislature envisioned when this passed came up. Because to my mind, it'd be totally legit in this report to say the legislature asked us to do this. We're doing this, but here are the realities that you need to deal with too. That a lot has changed since this legislation was passed.
Does anybody unless you were going to address that topic, Emily, does anybody want to respond to Chris? Because that's a very apt observation and something we've been paying a lot of attention to, Chris. But I wonder if other people have thoughts.
I guess one very different funding landscape now, and I wholeheartedly agree with acknowledging that, but I feel like just want to point out that conservation in Vermont has always been like, there has not been a large pot of funding for conservation in Vermont traditionally. It spiked during the Biden era and is now like kind of fallen back down. And this is one federal administration. The next federal administration could do something very different. So I think acknowledging that the reality that we're in and how that's changed, but also acknowledging that this is cyclical and could change again. Because I wouldn't want to like pour too much cold water on this because of the current situation, recognizing that that could change in 4 years.
Yes, I think we want to be ready for it to change. There are still public programs, federal programs that are running in even under this administration that might be helpful, whether they're like, transportation related that allow us to do resilience work that's connected to roads. USDA ASAP Ale is still being administered by VHCB and partners. So I think we want to acknowledge the reality of how, in particular, public funding at the federal level has changed. We should be aware of the potential, out year budgets for state of Vermont in this time of decreasing public resources. But before I hand this off to Emily, or if anybody else wants to respond to this, I wanted to point out that over the last 6 years, we've seen an increase in support for VHCB in terms of the property transfer tax and getting the full statutory funding at VHCB has allowed us to increase our NHR funding from about $1.5 million per year in the teens in 2020, 2021, up to like $6.5 million this year. So I don't know if that's peaking, Gannon, to your point, and it's going to go down. But because VHCB has been funded at its full statutory share, we've been able to triple or more the amount of NHR funding, as well as having $4 to $5 million of Vermont dollars that attract $4 to $5 million of ASAP Ale dollars for agricultural conservation. So I feel very resource rich, I kind of in this moment in terms of the state dollars that we have, but compared to the scale of federal funding that we might have thought might have been available, it's certainly not there. But I don't think we should be pessimistic. I think we should continue to make a plan that works with where we're starting from, and that attracts good federal programming and private supports in the future because it's got really good outcomes for communities and people. Anyway, Emily, go ahead.
Thanks, Trey. I have one quick thing that I just wanted to share, and then maybe a longer thing. Going back to the 59-181 sort of linkage, I watched Billy Koster's testimony in the State House to House Environment from last week, where he called for Act 181 to be, for the Tier 3 and road rule pieces of Act 181 to be repealed. And thought that was, I really appreciated what he said in House Environment. And one of the things he said was he thought that if the legislature continues to push those pieces of 181, it will be to the detriment of Act 59. So I think that's the fact that ANR is stating that in the legislature, I feel like is an important piece of the puzzle for us just to be thinking about. Like, that is really, really serious feedback, I think, that ANR is hearing, that we are hearing from community members.
And I think the damage, just related to that, I think the damage done to conservation design may be pretty
Yeah,
substantial too.
it may certainly be. It may certainly be. And then the other piece is I feel like what's missing, and Trey, maybe you're going here next, and Annie and sort of BHCB, what's missing from these themes is all of the feedback that really had to do with process and power, and the way that people are engaged in policy implementation in the state, which I think is like a big piece of what we heard through those community engagement sessions, and will be a big piece of what, as a large group of people, not just VHCB, but all of us who are engaged in conservation in some way, is going to be like, I think, a really important part of our work moving forward. And so I'm curious about how the TAC can talk about that today.
That's, yes, alluded to that, and as I was saying, that there's sort of like what we've learned about how to do process and how to do engagement is one of the three most important, sort of the three things we're trying to do with this feedback, and be aware that we're implementing this even as we go along. And so being reflective of what we've learned about good processes is definitely on the list, Emily. It wasn't one of the kind of things that sort of jumped out about the plan itself that we wanted to summarize for today. But again, this was just a really quick high level summary of some feedback about the items in the plan. But that's on the table, for sure. It's on the table, and recognizing and welcoming the work that you and Ginny are doing to help us really think about that and action on that for now and July 1st forward.
Yeah, I totally appreciate that. And I also think that if in these spaces where all of you, I'm looking sort of at everybody in this room here, are at the table, we're not naming those things, they get dropped really quickly. We have a lot of expertise in the room on the technicalities of conservation and policy development and those sorts of things. We have less expertise, although we do have a couple of people who are really good at it, in that process and power conversation. And so I wouldn't want it to be pushed to the side in any way.
Heard.
I think Jean has a hand up.
No, I'm sorry. I don't.
Oh,
I was
okay.
just clapping for Emily. Thank you, Emily.
Oh, wonderful. Okay.
I did, however, put a provocative comment in the chat. So in case you all missed it, please scroll up. And it's a really earnest question. And I don't know if there is time today, but I would love to really explore, are these acts totally distinct, or are they interrelated? Thank you.
Like I was saying earlier, I think that we have three kind of like prompts for discussion. We're into we have about 45 more minutes maybe on the agenda to talk about hot topics. We had suggested a couple of things that are kind of really on our minds, is like how to deal with the comments that we don't want to lose the breadth of the plan. We don't want to lose specificity, but we also want to simplify. So that's one of the things we wanted to ask you about today. We also wanted to ask you about this has come up from a couple other comments, but how do we empower regional and local and statewide partnerships going forward? Like how do we build on the momentum of the work that we're doing now at the statewide, regional, and local level in kind of collaborative planning processes? But then we had said, what else is on people's minds? So it seems like people are kind of like, there's a couple things that are out there in the chats right now. People have asked about, if I'm counting up the number of times I see Act 181 in the chat, it's 4 or 5 times. So people did want to talk about that. And then there's other things as well. So I'm going to defer to the question that Jean just alluded to, see if anybody if TAC members want to respond to that, which is, should these be talked about together? Are they linked, or are they distinct? But before VHCB or A&R answer that, I want to see what other TAC members think.
Trey, I would also just given that we only have 54 minutes left, want to stress focusing this meeting in this group on what is most useful for you all and you in drafting the plan that's going to come back out. So I would love to engage in the Act 181 question and like that broader issue. But if that is not going to directly reflect in what you are looking to bring together in this plan, maybe we can like find another time to discuss that.
Well, Gene had offered to help to host some time to do that as well. I think in this chat here, I think.
Yes, happy to. I can do that. But if, obviously, even just 5 minutes today would be helpful orientation. There's a lot swirling.
I'm gonna call on Nick, whose hand is raised, and then see if anybody else wants to. Any quick comments about that process today?
Yeah, I'm happy. Do I have the floor for a second?
Yes, go ahead, Nick, please.
No, just for quick. I mean, I think Gannon's, and I would wholeheartedly agree. I do think it feels like we're at an acutely sensitive moment where, to the extent that like we should inform the mechanics and the tech and sort of the plan itself, but if the plan is not positioned appropriately to the broader environment in which it lands, we just saw what happened with Act 181. Like things been around for 2 years, like, and the uproar, and it killed it remarkably fast. Like that is, it's kind of shocking. So I think I do feel like it's super important to make sure that we start to think about how this will land with Vermonters generally. And I had thrown a comment in the chat earlier. I think there's an element, and I appreciate the point of like, it feels disingenuous to say that like Act 59 and Act 181 have nothing to do with one another. Like that's not true. Like if we look at this like, connected landscapes and preserving biodiversity, and the idea of like preserving a vibrant and healthy Vermont, like yeah, they're aimed at the same thing or similar things, I think. And Alex, I think you put that sort of like tools versus rules. I think there's an opportunity to lean into these are extraordinarily different approaches to the same problem. And I think we heard a lot of the feedback, at least that I've read through the Act 181 kind of it's not that folks disagree with the idea that Vermont that we should protect these sensitive areas. Like that's not, I don't think people disagree with that as a concept. So there's an opportunity perhaps to say like, we heard you. We also know that people care about this. It's great that we have this very different approach, which is entirely voluntary. I noted that I think there's even things like language, like for a long time, I know it's been a consistent term that's used, but the term willing really kind of rubs me in a way that's kind of like, are you willing to go along with us? Like when the people show up to your door and like, we need to take you to the police station. Are you go willing, or you go like there's an element of like, I could picture that even triggering people in a way where it's like, we will rely on landowners to be partners. And just the terms that we end up using, I can see we're at this knife's edge where people could easily get triggered down to feeling like this is a government overreach or a takings of land or things like that. Whereas if an opportunity to recognize the concerns and the feedback and acknowledge that we have this extraordinarily different approach to achieving some of those same goals.
Thank you, Nick. Really good points. Alex, yeah, I thought of that same song, Chris Campany. How you gonna come? Alex, I think you put your hand up like 1 second before Krista, but we haven't heard from Krista yet. So I'm going to call on Krista and then back to you, friend. Yep. And then I think I'm going to just break down the invisible divide of Zach Porter. If you want to use some of your public comment time now to respond after Alex and Krista, let's not be too formalistic here. So Alex, Krista, Zach.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I think
I did that backwards. Sorry. Krista, Alex, Zach.
Thanks. I just am kind of echoing what Nick said about, I think right now the perception matters almost more than the substance of what is in either of these plans. It is all about the story that is being told or believed, and the substance matters so much. But I think like, it's almost like I think about what Chris said at the last meeting about like how he wished that we had more of like, there had been more of a like education rollout of like, what does Act 181 mean for the public? And that never happened. And so it's sort of like people got caught on their heels. And I think knowledge is power. And so like, it's almost like, just throwing spaghetti at the wall, but it's like we need some sort of like PR campaign or something to explain like, here's what these two things are, here's how they relate or don't relate, and like here are opportunities to engage, and Um, I feel like the substance is not going to be received if the perception or the sort of narratives around it can't be broken down.
Thank you. Seemed to be a lot of nodding heads for that. Alex, go ahead, friend.
Yeah, I'm just gonna say Nick covered a lot of what I was about to say, but we've got our BHA listening session here next week, so I've been thinking a lot about how I know this is going to come up, and I've heard Act 59 referred to as a land grab quite a lot recently, and I think what we have to push is that Act 59 is going to be whatever the people of Vermont want it to be, because Act 59 is a set of tools to empower them, and that is distinctly different from 181. Obviously, the overarching goals are not dissimilar and are totally intertwined, but there's a real difference in people's minds to being empowered to do what they want to do and to help Vermont remain viable as a biodiverse system, and telling them what to do. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Zach, did you want? I suggested if you wanted to jump in. This is a fine time now. I also see a hand from Ornella after that.
Thank you. I appreciate the chance to just weigh in briefly here. Zach Porter with Standing Trees. I think, yeah, there's been lots of great comments made, and I'm really grateful for the points that have been raised by several speakers in just the last few minutes. I think what I just want to add here is it's real. Words are so important. Perception is reality. To Krista's point, it is that is what the perception is what's driving this right now, and it is so important right now to be careful with words, because to the several people here have correctly identified that in a broad sense, right, these two bills are attempting to balance ecosystem protection, broadly defined, with how we develop and utilize our resources, broadly defined, right? I'm not trying to create two completely separate buckets there. Yes, they're linked in that sense, but there's a real danger of, if we talk a little bit too, if we aren't really careful about how we choose our words, what's going on in the blogosphere right now, as I think you've probably all seen, is this kind of conspiratorial notion that these are linked together in a very negative way, in a very negative context. That is different from talking about and helping people understand that these are both about how are we going to make sure that Vermont is still a great place to live and work and play and raise families and all those things long into the future, and that every form of life here in this state has a place. So there's a really key difference when we're thinking about what does the word linked mean. Linked can mean something very different depending on how the context. So I'm just calling that out as something to be careful about, because otherwise the conspiracy theories just get fueled even more if we're not careful. So yeah, anyways, thank you.
Thanks for being a consistent public observer of our processes, Zach. And thanks for being here. Ornella, you had a hand up.
Good morning, everyone. Oof, I'm hearing you all. And in no particular order, there's just so many things kind of like bubbling inside of me as I'm listening. I will say first, we keep talking to folks this week, and one of the consistent conversations we've had a number of evening events, is that land always brings up a lot of feelings in our bodies. And there is a reality in being trauma informed that when we have a lot of feelings, we don't listen very well. And as I'm thinking about what's the next PR move, and we're thinking about how do we connect with community, because when I hear PR, there's like a suspicion inside of me too. There's like this way in which I think of like, how are we spinning it? And I feel like PR has been misused against our community so much that this is like part of the issue. When things are coming at our community members, they're like looking at it, looking through with like a suspicious eye, plus activated nervous systems. What information is getting retained? Absolutely nothing. I don't know who here is also trauma informed, but one of the things we learn in that process is that our brain cannot store memory. It actually cannot remember when we're activated. It does not remember what is presented in front of us. It doesn't remember what happened in the room with much integrity. So when we're looking at a whole bunch of community members that are right now living under a lot of stress, at the federal level, we're dealing with what some people are calling fascism, and some people are calling, I don't know what else, but there's like many different perspectives in which folks are looking at the federal landscape. Everybody's afraid and feeling under threat. That's one level of activation that's happening. Related to conservation, there's huge amounts of persecution. I heard something related to domestic terrorists as an accusation. That is a big fear. Those are some big words coming from the federal landscape, and there's no way that's not reverberating through our conservation communities with fear. And then there's this fear now, like there's a big land grab. Right. So, like, we can't even reconcile the level of stories, projections, and perceptions that are happening. And we are really in a difficult situation when we're trying to give people information in a moment that they're like not ready to hear it or not in any place to really hold, receive it, and process it. And that in itself kind of causes harm. So it's a very, very difficult moment in time. I keep thinking about what could offer some kind of stabilization for our community. What could stabilization look like? I don't have an answer yet, but that's the first question that's coming up for me as I'm listening about the next PR move. Throwing more information at people right now is not a helpful thing. Trying to give facts to people right now for them to understand facts, that's not going to work. Getting people together and letting them know, hey, we heard you, everything's okay. We're going to do this differently and start to take some actions because, right, the proof is in the pudding. I think we can talk anything we want to talk. We can say anything we want to say right now. Like, that's not going to be as helpful as us like taking some concrete actions. Repeal, good first action. What are the next second actions as to like what that's going to provide some stabilizing moment for community to then be in a place to think, create, and do something that's going to actually be productive and generative in the future. That's my check. Thank you.
Thank you, Ornella. Other people really appreciated hearing that too, and good reminder. And I think it's just picking up on this notion that I heard a couple of other people say. It's just that right now perception is dominating, feelings are foremost, and I think it is. This is the main time I've experienced this kind of public sentiment has always been around bills that significantly change people's relationship to their property where they live. Shoreland protection is an example of that, and that restricted only a small amount of people who lived on lakes and ponds, but it was also a lot of hue and cry that needed to be addressed over a longer period of time, to really like let people's feelings stabilize and then show the response. So does anybody, I know we do have a couple of other questions we wanted to talk about today, from our perspective, again, like, part of fear is when people project onto ambiguity. If you're interpolating into something that seems ambiguous to you, you may project fear, or you may project anxiety. And so there was a great deal of call for people saying, try to be more specific and actionable with the framework. But then there was also at the same time, we heard from a lot of people who said, this is too complicated, too technical, and needs to be really streamlined and simplified. Those tasks don't need to be in kind of contention, but we wanted to talk about how to accomplish those things at the same time, because one way of simplifying is just reducing the amount of detail, but then you risk losing specificity. So I wanted to throw that question out to people today. If you're ready to, we don't have to move on from Act 181, but I think we heard a lot of good comments and then a very nice synthesis from Ornella. Anyway, go ahead, Ornella. I see your hand.
I hate to talk again, y'all, but what's the question? How can we make this information, like, how can we have, I think the best way to move forward is to have different entry points to this information.
Could you say more what you mean by different entry points?
Okay, so what I imagine is that you can have like different levels of depth for folks to be accessing the information at different levels of depth. So like if you have information that's like geared, I don't know, that's like interactive. Let's say there's an interactive website associated with this. An idea could be that. And then as you interact with the website, there are ways of like digging deeper and deeper into content, but that is all not showing up at once. I am not like an education specialist. I'm sure that we could hire and ask more kind of design and like accessibility questions from someone that would like that is a design, like a curriculum design expert of some kind. I see your hand, Nick. And yeah, I'm just like, I think that there's a way for us to have different entry points to the content in a way that does the both and like make the depth of the information available without it like being overwhelming. And I think it could also be a good idea, or something that's coming up for me as an idea, is to think about it as like if we could like gear information for different groups in Vermont, like different age groups. It could be really fun too, because then we would be like starting this education and this like gearing, connecting from young people through and creating the exposure into the content and the material. Because one thing I do know about education is that we learn better once we have some prior knowledge, and like the word recognition, the subject recognition across time is really going to help us create like a nice long-term basis of like language and continuity and culture, because we're hoping that all young people will stay here and continue to be Vermonters contributing to our civic systems. Check.
Thank you. Check. Love it. Nick, go ahead.
Yeah, I know we had talked about this, I think, at an earlier meeting, but sort of how folks access and it was really, I think, good articulation just now, what that looks like. I know that was some of what the latest iteration on the website has attempted to do in terms of drilling down. It does feel like, at least as a goal, that idea of like everybody can see the whole plan as an onion or whatever the analogy is, and be able to peel back and go down into pieces of it. I feel like and I thought this one and kind of going through the website, I felt like there were elements of that there, but it still felt very linear. And it was still very difficult for me to wrap my heads around my hand. Like, what is the whole thing? What is the next layer down when we take that next layer of depth? How can everybody look at the same thing, but also also be able to get that level of detail where they wanted still going plain language and trying to make it communicable, but like sort of principle of not making, it's not a different plan for different people. It's the same plan, but creating that level of ability to access kind of the information at whatever level of specificity folks want.
Can I ask you before I see Gannon's hand, but so you were specifically addressing something that was coming up in my mind as Ornella was talking, which is that we had tried to do kind of an accordion setup for this. And so it wasn't that didn't work, that you could pull out or jump in, but that you could never kind of see the whole
exactly
as you started. So understanding the whole forest and then deciding I want to zoom in here to this particular section. Okay.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure I was hearing and capturing that. Thanks, Nick. Gannon.
Yeah, just a clarifying question, Trey. Is what you were hearing related to scope at all? Like it's an ambiguous scope, therefore people aren't understanding what this plan is truly about and how this all relates together, or is it more in the language we're using?
I mean, there were people who we did receive some comments about simplifying the scope, but what I was talking about here is simplifying the like language and structure. Mostly I think there's support for the broad range of recommendations that are in the plan. That doesn't wasn't somehow a major trigger like across the board for people. But there were a lot of comments from people about complexity and jargon and the over reliance on technical language and acronyms, missing cross references. There are a lot of things that frankly we know about and just aren't polished in the final draft yet, but that need to get into that next draft final version of this. But Gannon, if that was the beginning of a question, let me pass it back to you.
Well, that was my question because I know in the past I've brought this up and I feel like I've continued to hear it at the listening sessions I attended, but just a struggle with understanding exactly what this act is about. And I think we've, as I believe I said last TAC meeting, contributed to that by trying to make this plan about everything and for everybody. Um and so I will again say like I think narrowing the scope and keeping this like to a clearly articulating what this plan is and isn't would be helpful in helping folks understand exactly what this is. And it gets into like that Act 181 conversation of like where do these things start linking or start crossing into each other. And if we are clear and defined in what this is, it will just help with that ambiguity. And I think it will also help in clearly communicating in the language we're using um, for these actions and for how we're communicating this in the plan. So that's just my one thought of like, I think in some ways the ambiguity of the language and the ambiguity of the scope can be linked.
Thanks. That sounds like a lecture that I went to in graduate school in English about the relationship between the language and the plot and the symbolism. But I don't think we need to get too deep into that, though I do miss the kind of talk. Kate, do you want to respond to Gannon or something new?
Well, I think my comment kind of builds on, and I apologize.
Great.
I've been multitasking this morning, so I apologize for not being here right at 9:30. I guess where I want to go is, I've been sort of listening in for the last half an hour or so, just trying to get caught up on the conversation that you guys have been having, and I think this sort of builds on the communication and the sort of conversation that I've been hearing about ambiguity. I guess I just want to share that as part of our listening sessions and in a lot of the conversations that I've been having with forest landowners, is that I think one of the critical opportunities here, in terms of a next iteration of this plan, is to try to make landowners a little bit more centered in the plan itself. I think some of the feedback that I have been hearing is that the plan itself doesn't sort of seem to speak to landowner needs, landowner challenges, and I know Trey, we've shared some of that feedback, through the more formal process, but I just want to highlight that now because I think what concerns me is a lot of this conversation is around like, how do we pitch this better, right? Like, how do we get other folks on board, which I think is a really important part of the conversation, but I don't think it's the full story. And I think we're really missing some critical feedback that at least I know, for us as an organization that we've been hearing, which is landowners don't really feel like, their needs and their realities are being addressed in the plan. And so I think that's an opportunity for the next iteration of this plan, and that's what I'm hoping to see in draft two. And I know, a lot of our members, a lot of our landowners are feeling the same way. So happy to share more, but I just want to highlight that as something I think we should also be talking about.
Definitely well articulated, very, very much something that we've heard. The goal is to make people see themselves in it, so we need to do a little bit better job of doing that and helping to do that in an articulable and focused way. And then also defer to other, as Gannon, you said, deferring to other processes where we start to cross into the work of the Forest Future Roadmap or the SCORP or something. I think Jean, then Ornella, based on how hands are showing up on my screen. Jean, we can't hear you if you're talking. but you're off mute.
I'm gonna jump in just because mine felt brief. I want to say another thing I heard in what Kate was saying, and I'm trying to figure out specifically how to say it. I heard a very like an observation in the future possibility, and I also heard like what is the entry point of landowners into this process? And I just wanted to like I just wanted to like rename this community engagement gap, and and like just like that blind spot we had as to like how we made the process so clearly top down and not like I keep thinking about what this process could have looked like, especially 181, y'all, not specifically Act 59, if we had engaged landowners and hunters from the inside out of it in the creation of the rulemaking. and and I just want to just echo that. I didn't hear that in the reflection back, and that was all.
Thanks. That hopefully we're capturing everything, and it's good to articulate what we're hearing. Did anybody else want to build on that? If not, I have a second question, or we have a second question, but there's a second question I'm going to ask if I don't see anybody kind of jumping in to say more about specificity versus.
Can I jump back in? Sorry, my connection dropped. This is Jean.
Hi, Jean. Yeah, we saw you tried to talk but couldn't hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Just wanted to say thank you, Kate, for what you said. Like 100%, I agree and think it's really important that we focus on that comment. I would love to spend a whole TAC meeting looking at the plan through the lens of, are these recommendations, like how could these recommendations be framed to center the needs of landowners? I think that is missing from the plan right now, and it's really important. And my question, why I raised my hand, was I hear discussions, Trey, you're saying, okay, there's like a round of edits, plain language edits that need to happen. And I am just curious what the plan is for that, because it is no small task and it's really hard. So yeah, thank you.
Well, as part of the next draft, we are trying to declutter. We some people observed that the current draft was kind of cluttered with repetitive but not additive themes under each pathway. People have suggested more plain language, so that's what, as we've been editing and turning the next draft, we've been looking at that as well as where to incorporate ideas or make changes as we're working on the next draft. So that's those are details that we'll see as we put this back out, and we're hoping we can do that within the next month. There, just to say, there's a tremendous volume of inputs to receive and process, much more than we even anticipated or hoped for. So doing all that and really taking it in is going to be quite a logistical challenge. But as you asked, or as you said, and I had said it earlier, also thinking about how we can express ourselves in a more clear and simple way is part of the next round. But anyway, yeah, Gannon, go ahead. And I'm just going to say we're about 10 minutes from pausing for public comment. And there are a couple of members of the public here with us at that time, but if there's more time left over, we can continue conversation after that as needed too.
I'll try to keep this brief, Trey. Thanks, and
No,
also
go. Yeah.
respond to your actual question this time. In terms of specificity, I feel like the plan and how you've structured it does a good job of starting high level in general and then working down. And to me, the actions should be very specific because we have the general guidance of the objectives and the pathways. And then when we get to the actions, it feels like for this to be an implementable, useful plan for all of us on this call and for others around the state, those actions should be very specific. So I would encourage you to try to keep the actions as specific as possible and to capture that generality and larger discussion in the other areas.
Good. Yes, I think I agree with you 100% and wonder if anybody wants to add to that. Then if not, and you can reject this and go just if there's other things on your mind besides these topics, if this doesn't stimulate us for the last few minutes, this is okay. But another thing we've been thinking about, and this reflects some comments last time and over the last few TAC meetings, is how it's like we've really built in this process an ability to work together as this group and then with our communities, and we don't want to lose that as we step into implementation. And so one of the questions, kind of a key next steps question that we have is how do we not miss a beat? How do we not like obviously, you know, Annie and we'll take Monday off maybe after we put it out, but then after that we're going to be back on Tuesday morning implementing this plan. No, just kidding. But all of us, how do we maintain this level and maybe even expand to some of the comments here so that we are engaging people, where they are. Um, we heard a lot, especially when we went out and talked sort of like, hey, you're in a regional area here, that people liked the idea of thinking about this from the perspective of their county or their community or their watershed or the biophysical region that they were in. Um, do you all support the notion that we need to continue to let people identify their collaborations and the local leaders and folks who would be able to engage and help to interface with the public funders and the public people who at VHCB and A&R do have a top-down oversight role, but want to find ways to collaborate and sort of defer leadership out into communities. How can we do that successfully when part of the structure that we're operating within is that there's a set of agencies who interact with the legislature and through whom funding comes, and we want to do but we are also hearing people say, how do we sort of step out of the way and let people lead? Yeah, Gene, you're right on that.
Thank you. Thanks. Yeah, right on it. I think one of the reasons that this last round of community engagement has been so stimulating, especially for people on the ground, is that there were funds attached. So, and that were pretty accessible and of like a decent starting point. And so LAOB is working with a number of partners, which could include this group, in really encouraging these like resourcing, having the systems resource these community engagements, get-togethers, dinners. NOFA's having the long-handled spoon dinners as an example. We're having our walks right now, so kind of low-key community events where there's food and an opportunity to talk about land. That kind of next step would be very supportive of the community staying involved, and at a minimum, even just, yeah, I think involved and resourced at least to be able to have this conversation. Sorry, there's something I'm trying to say about the trust gesture of the system and VHCB saying, here's resources for you to have this conversation. That is a really important next step for keeping people engaged, in addition to the fact that community members need money to be able to stay engaged. Thank you.
Well, and that was part of what LAOB had said would make these stakeholder-led listening sessions work was the sort of trust posture of a small grant. So appreciating that a lot, Gene, both in the structure of what we just did, and that kind of goes to something I was thinking about is like we don't want to do the exact same thing because of course we're at a different stage, but what could we do that builds on that analog? And what's another question? Sorry, I'm throwing a lot of questions at you, so you can tap in wherever you want. But like, what's the appropriate scale at which to do it? Like, if we just like we had some stakeholder-led listening sessions that were really quite specific, like really localized. We had some that were like organizations that operated statewide, and I was trying to think about something in between, like something that you know groups and collaborations that operate at some version of what we mean by regional, either at the county or watershed or biophysical region level. Because we could, while we would love to do something for one farm and their neighbors, we couldn't do 500 things for one farm and their neighbors. That would be harder to fund and carry out. So some kind of span of control is what I was wondering about. Conservation commissions also, AVCC has really tapped into this, Alex, and but there's 251 communities, so there's not as many conservation commissions. So maybe if I stop talking, other people will start.
I'll just say that I like the idea of a system that somehow can reach everyone. And it feels really tricky to have one system that will reach everyone when there's so many different ways that we engage with this work, with each other, with the land. And so I'm curious what it looks like to build something that can be a little bit emergent, a little bit flexible. Maybe it's regional, but also allows space for different groups that are maybe not as regional to engage in the way that is most meaningful to them. And I don't have a plan. Sorry.
This wasn't like 17 times 3, quick, what's the answer?
Yeah, I don't want us to get, I think that we need systems that can shift over time in different places, or we run the risk of replicating the same issue of power structures that we have now.
Apt. Thank you. Others? And I'm going to pause us there and invite Tara or Zach if they have a public comment at this point as members of the public that they want to share, and then give people we can kind of do some wrap up thoughts as we finish up with that.
I'd be happy to jump in. I'm in the car, so hope you can hear me all right.
We can, Tara, thank you.
Great. Yeah, taking in the comments folks are saying around implementation and also around the communications and how the plan is kind of packaged and specifically organized for folks to be able to understand it and get what they need out of it. Thinking in ways of, to what degree work can be done to look at what scale that different actions need to be implemented at, whether that's state, regional, or local, and then starting to break down into implementation, like understanding where, at what level different work needs to be done, and then how that can be, put into whether that needs resourcing at different levels to organize conversations at state, regional, or local levels. But I think that would be helpful in, and I'm not looking at the plan in front of me, but in understanding, the different actions have different scopes and where can and does different work need to be taking place to start to get into then what those conversations and implementation can look like. And on a separate note in terms of, again, kind of organization of the plan, thinking about, and this is a half-baked idea, but thinking about how the plan is both big and encompasses a lot, and also how can it be broken down so it's useful. So that both having like a good executive summary that communicates clearly like the big picture of the plan so folks can get their head around that. And then also maybe there's some kind of organization of the plan, breaking out certain parts of it by, who would be interested. So sort of like a section of like, if you're a landowner, if you're a conservation organization, like different groups of folks who might be looking at it. And maybe it's either sort of a comprehensive, like, these are all the recommendations or suggested actions or XYZ that are relevant for this group, or maybe it's even a smaller subsection of, here's our sense of maybe the top 3 or 5 things that might be of interest to you. So it's a way of both having framing to help folks understand the whole plan, but then because there's so much in it and not wanting to lose that there's so much great stuff in it, how do you also make it more manageable for folks to like jump into like, okay, well, what's my role? What can I do? And what's useful in this to me that I can help to implement?
Well said. Thank you, Tara. I appreciate that. I think we had said the last TAC meeting, and we'll reiterate now too, like definitely looking for raised hands. That's one of the things we had said, is that there was a lot of VHCB and A&R identified as initial leads for things, but only to get the process started, and not because we didn't want to defer to and include other groups as the leads on things, but wanted to take responsibility to make sure we were willing to see any of the things through. Anyways, Krista, do you want to respond to Tara?
Yeah, I think I just wanted to jump in and say that I think there are some like very tangible things that we could do that would help with, having these different entry points and being able to engage at these different levels. I think, if there's a budget for a UX designer to be, to hire a professional to like figure out how to create the website for this plan, like that would be incredible. I think those, like their whole job is to figure out like how people engage with information and, like very user-centered experience around like what do people want from this site, how are they going to interact with it. So I would say like that's an opportunity. And then I also um, have been thinking a lot about what Ornella said earlier, in terms of, how, when and how people are able to receive information, and how just like throwing information at people is often not super helpful. And I also wonder if there's any opportunity for more of like a marketing campaign, not for the purpose of, throwing things at people, but for the purpose of visibility. Like for the purpose of like, hey, this thing exists, there's a place for you in it. Like find your entry point, like some way to like when people are scrolling their feeds, it pops up and it generates curiosity. It's not about like hammering information into people. It's more just about like maybe reaching some people that we wouldn't reach through, these other avenues. They're not on our email list. They're not, already engaged with other organizations. But I think some strategic and thoughtful marketing could go a really long way. And I would be really interested in working on that with Ornella or whoever else, in thinking through what that could look like.
Thank you for modeling the raised hand there. Not the yellow one on your screen, but like, hey, I want to dig in. Um, Good. And so Tara, thank you for your comment. Thank you for the responses in the chat, and Krista. Um, Going back to public comment, Zach, I think you're the other member of the public here. Do you have anything more? You had a comment earlier, but more before we end today?
Thanks, Trey. Zach Porter with Standing Trees. And I think, maybe just add in a couple quick things. One is that, I've heard in the last several weeks confusion over something very fundamental, which is that Act 59 defines conservation, but it only defines conservation in the context of Act 59. There are so many types and ways of practicing conservation. Act 59 doesn't attempt to limit the many, many wonderful ways that people engage in conservation. And I think there is again, going back to the perception that somewhere along the way here, it became this feeling that there wasn't a place for the things that I do. And I've heard this come up on a number of occasions during the conversation today. And so I think it's really important in the document that you are working on here to make it abundantly clear that there are many, many types of and ways of practicing conservation. And at the core of Act 59, not the only, but at the core of Act 59 is one form of conservation that's really important for the future of Vermont. And this is a goal setter and it's an invitation to get at the raised hand kind of notion that Krista was, just talking about. So I think hopefully in that way, we can kind of get past some of the misperceptions that have been generated. One other thing, I think I've said this before, and I hope I'm not sounding too much like a broken record, but there's I want to just acknowledge the double standard that a bill that is attempting to level the playing field for all of the other life forms in Vermont, right? When bills like the Forest Future Strategic Roadmap passed, there was not a pitchforks at the door. What's going to happen to our amphibians if this is implemented? There was no repeal attempt. And I guess I'm asking for a good faith, response from people who are in communities that are potentially represented in the meeting here today, who maybe have some concerns about Act 59. The purpose of Act 59 is to complement things like the Forest Future Strategic Roadmap, some of the other great plans that Vermont has for maintaining our fantastic agricultural economy. This is the corollary. It's a equally important part of the big picture. And what we have to be careful about, and what I'm worried about with the final version of this plan, is that we get scared of helping to move the needle or to try to rebalance those scales, even though that's the chance that Act 59 gives us, not to take away from all those other really important efforts that are ongoing and that we need to address more so in the future, but to make sure that our ecologically functional landscape and the biodiversity it supports and all those climate resilience benefits that we're going to get from this, that those are also elevated. So I don't want those to get buried by the very important notion that we got to put people also, of course, in the middle of this. And we have to think about how it's going to impact people, but not to bury those other things and to lose the chance that Act 59 presents us to have all of these intermingling and hopefully complementary efforts. So thank you, and appreciate the time to comment.
Again, appreciate you being here with us and consistently. And Tara, thanks for your comment today as well. I guess, that there was a question there, and I guess I wonder if anybody wants to either further develop something that they've been saying or feeling through the meeting today, or respond to anything that Tara and then Krista or Zach offered here as we're finishing up.
This is Jean. I've spoken a lot, so I can hold back, but I would love to respond to Zach.
I don't think you're stepping on anybody's toes to respond, Jean. No
Okay.
other hands are up.
Great. Yeah.
But if anybody hasn't had a chance to speak yet, after Jean goes, let's make sure anybody who's got something on their mind has a chance to share it.
First of all, Zach, thank you so much for your comment, and just for all your work in this process. I think for me, I love and agree with what you said at the end of these plans and these policies and land use priorities should work together, and ideally, we will bring them together and they can be complementary. I think what I've been struggling with as I'm navigating all these different plans and all of these policy making, strategic sessions is that they're quite siloed, and that we don't really have a space. We haven't had a space in Vermont to look at all of our land use needs together. And that means that our opportunity to actually bring these plans together in a harmonious way, we don't have a plan for how to do that. And then because of the way resourcing happens and, scarcity and because the plans aren't actually developed together or bridging to one another effectively, then they are competing for resources. And I guess I'll just speak from my own opinion, like that's where a lot of the sort of economic impact and the marginalizing impact happens, is in the gaps between the analysis or the assessment. Sorry, a giant truck drove by just then. But yeah, so that's what came up for me, Zach, and you know, always happy to talk more. I feel like we're probably due for a catch up. So thanks.
Yes, sir.
I've been trying to sort of gather my thoughts on this, and and they're not fully gathered. So this isn't going to present any great answer to what Zach brings up. But I will say that I think one of the things that I'm kind of realizing through this process is that we're in a troubling political moment, and I don't mean federally, I mean across the board right now for conservation. And I think about like the comparison between this moment and trying to drum up support for the biodiversity elements of Act 59 in comparison to a time not eons ago when like we passed the Wilderness Act with overwhelming popularity in this country. And I just think that one thing that it's really kind of been hard to reckon with throughout all this and watching 181 play out is that people are, not everybody by any stretch, but a lot of folks around here are in this position where they're concerned about their basic needs to a degree that the like space left for them to worry about their property's impact on amphibians is just not front of mind. And that we have to understand that to a degree, but you know, there was so much pushback around 181 without a whole lot of like acknowledgement of what it was trying to accomplish for the non-human inhabitants of this state. And I don't know what to do with that exactly. It's a really difficult thing to reckon with. And we can't tell people what to care about, and we shouldn't want to, and it would be arrogant to think that we are in the place to. But I also, as somebody who would like to think of himself as caring an awful lot about the non-human inhabitants of our shared piece of land, and somebody that takes a lot from the land and feels like a tremendous amount of compulsion to do right by it as a result. I don't know what we do with that. I think like there's a writer who's popular in the hunting world, Stephen Ranella, who is often quoted as saying that conservation is in some ways a privilege of the wealthy nations of this world, that it's a thing that folks have space to deal with and to advocate for when all their other needs are met. And I think we all feel that it shouldn't be that way to a degree, but it's a reality. That's all. Like I said, my thoughts aren't complete, but that's just it's a thing that what you said brought up that I've just been thinking about a lot lately. Watching these two acts play out, and I'll quit my rambling there.
Lord, I was born rambling man. Alex, thank you for that. You claim to be less than shoveled as you started, but your thoughts are always pretty well shoveled, and even if you feel like you're rambling, we really appreciate you and everybody here today. It is serious. It's really serious conversations happening, and I'll say on behalf of Gus and Annie and I hope Gunnar and Billy and Becca too. Like we're taking this moment very seriously and listening as hard as and skillfully as we can. And I'll just say something I said at the beginning too, which is that I don't think public perception of the value of the landscape has changed all that much, Alex, from the past, the moment where we passed the Wilderness Act. And again, in the comments we're receiving and in a lot of the dialogue that's out there, I'm not hearing a wholesale rejection of like biodiversity or healthy landscapes, connected landscapes, whether it's hunting grounds, places that are productive, places that are reserved. That seems to be the one universal. People are really arguing about the means, and I think we should be aware of that. And people are arguing about process and inclusion in process, and I think we definitely. Emily started us off by saying make sure that we're talking about that, thinking about that, addressing that, and we certainly are. But if we become aware of that, and if other people are aware of that, and you don't, I know we don't have time to talk about this today. If you don't agree with me that there's a still strong public sentiment out there for the values that we hold around the landscape, that's something more to talk about. Anyway, let me defer to Chris to have the last wise word here today. And if you need to drop off because you had an 11, thank you for being here.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, to me, a lot of the conversation with, the whole Act 181 approach was, if you read the language, it was posited as for tier 3 and road rule, is posited as a conservation measure, but all it did was it threw people into a permitting process that they'd never been in before. And and because you never really probably touched it before, you didn't understand it, but you heard a lot of really bad things about it. And so I was asked about this. We're presenting to all of our towns right now around the regional plans. And, to me, what it was a really abrupt cultural shift, right? And so I do think, I think we have the opportunity here, not to pivot, but just to kind of continue along having more conversations and hopefully around, I think the fear is loss of control, right? Because you already got this ethic and you've got this kind of culture in Vermont where you allow people, for most people, still allow people to kind of wander across their land for a variety of purposes, whether it's bird watching or hunting, fishing, just meditating, whatever it is that you want to do. The place where I came from in southern Appalachia, they created big national parks and they moved everybody off of those lands. They created big TVA lakes and they moved the people off of those lands. And then you'd mine under people's property and you move people off of their land. And so like the fear that you saw in Western North Carolina after Helene was real because of the lived experience there. And so it's kind of a different dynamic in other places, but here I think if we can kind of go back to this kind of really I think in my opinion just kind of putting stewardship for yourself and for community, which is kind of the Vermont broad ethos, I think that could really move this conversation in a more positive direction. And in my perfect world, if we can kind of move the legislature in that direction too, it might be helpful to have more productive, not just conversations, but frankly outcomes. And I would argue for making that it would be a worthwhile investment. I know the state doesn't want to invest in personnel, but to me it would be, I posted about the DMAT program in Mississippi around deer management. That's a game management program, but I think if we were to really talk about, I think a lot of people would really welcome the ability to kind of make a phone call and say, come walk my land with me and tell me what I can do to, support like the thrushes or brook trout or this plant or whatever it is. I think people would really kind of welcome that approach. And I think in the end, we would achieve the goals of what the legislature's been talking about.
Thank you, Chris. People are dropping off as they need to go, and I think that was a nice way, a nice comment to end with. But if anybody else wants to say goodbye or just shout something out, great. Otherwise, I would say thank you all. Thank you, Ornella. I see your chat there. Good meeting, good discussion, and great people, all of you. Thank you very much.